Welcome to the Intuitive Insight Podcast. This is Timmy E., your host, your counselor, and your Sherpa for our episodic journey through mental health, counseling, and other areas of wellness and balance. Tonight's episode is about depression, the different types of depression that we can experience in our lives, as well as some treatment suggestions, treatment options, and what to do in order to notice if you do have symptoms of depression. Join us in the discussion, nuggets of insight, and much, much more for you tonight on the Intuitive Insight Podcast with me, Timmy E. Hello and welcome once again to another episode of the Intuitive Insight Podcast with me, Timmy E., your counselor, your Sherpa. And today's episode is episode 2, and we will be focusing on a mental health issue, psychological issue that affects all of us in some way, shape, or form throughout our life, and actually might show up in multiple times in our lives. Whether or not it becomes a much more serious issue to deal with, that remains to be seen. But what I'm talking about, of course, is depression. Now, a lot of the times with depression, there are so many different perspectives of it. I believe that everybody experiences depression in some sense, whether they are sad that there's a change coming, whether they're sad if a person who they really care about passes away, if they're sad that they didn't do as well as they wanted. There's this sadness that we experience, and this is an important part of our life. We need sadness in order to understand for ourselves that, okay, this is something that's going to happen in our lives and on a fairly regular basis. However, sadness and the feeling sadness, having that is different than depression, because depression itself is not just an emotion, it's something that encompasses your entire, your daily life. And it starts to overcome you in a perspective, in a way that prevents you from living your daily life to the best way that you possibly can. And here on the Intuitive Insight Podcast and with Intuitive Insight Counseling, a really important aspect that we always try to work on with everyone who I work with, all the clients and whatnot, is to focus on on taking an opportunity to be the best version of yourself. And sometimes when you're experiencing sadness and ultimately depression, it can get really, really difficult. But let's go through what depression actually is. Now, with depression versus sadness. Sadness is a state of emotion. And for the most part, in many situations, many situations, emotions are fleeting. They come in, you notice them, and it goes away. Some of the emotions, the basic emotions that we feel, are sadness, anger, fear, happiness, and even kind of a neutralness that can come over us, where just things are okay. There's no, euthymia, which is like, nothing too, it's great, it's okay, it's nothing too great, nothing too bad. It's kind of like there are those different kinds of emotions that come through us each and every single day. But the difference with depression is that it's longer term. It's sadness, but it's ramped up and it's longer term. It lasts for a while, and it starts to take over different parts of your life. For example, the official clinical definition of depression, major depressive disorder, is number one, if you have 5 or more of certain symptoms. Basically, some of these symptoms include depressed mood for most of the day, nearly every day, decreased interest in pleasurable activities, significant weight loss, even when you're not dieting, or severe weight changes, despite not trying to diet or exercise, insomnia or sleep issues, very, very fatigued and a lack of energy every single day, nearly every day. Feelings of feeling worthlessness, that things aren't worth getting up to do. Even recurring thoughts of suicidal ideation, that things are just not worth it. These are all things that are part of depression. And the most important thing, especially if you want to consider this to be more of a from a clinical standpoint for major depressive disorder, is that you have to have these marked symptoms for at least 2 weeks or more. And if you say, let's just put it like this, everyone wants to quantify it. Everyone puts a number on it. Let's say if you have a week, 7 days, if you experience symptoms like that for 5, 6 of those 7 days for 2 weeks or more, then there's a higher chance that you might be experiencing depression. And not just one that seems to fade away over time, one that seems to be staying with you. So that's a big, big difference. Actually, based on Medline.com, depression affects more than 19 million individuals in the United States. And it's a perpetual feeling that the sadness is just not going away, and that they persist and interfere with the everyday life. Let's put it like this. If someone was to tell me that, oh, I'm experiencing depression, and I speak with them, let's just say I speak with them on a Monday, and then on Friday I speak with them and they say, oh, I feel pretty good, they're still able to do things they need to do. They're going to their work, they're going to their job, they're going to school, they are able to take care of their responsibilities, and on a Friday I talk with them and they're able to do that. Perhaps it's not necessarily major depressive disorder, more so that they were feeling depressed or feeling an extended period of sadness, but was not something that was affecting their responsibilities. Now, if I speak to the same person on a Monday and they discuss they had no energy, they don't want to do anything, they didn't eat anything at all, they didn't clean their house or where they're living, they haven't gone to work, they're not feeling like going to work, so on and so forth. And then on Friday and then even the next week, they're still in that same experience, that same situation where they're not going to work. You can tell that they've become disheveled. You can tell that they're not grooming themselves appropriately. They're not following hygiene. That could be a sign that someone is going through a depressive episode. And that might be a time to think to think and say, hey, I think we should start getting some help for what's going on, or at least having an opportunity to start that process. So that's a very, very big distinction between sadness and depression. There are also different levels of depression as well. It's not just major depressive disorder that we experience, that I've experienced, that I've worked with in the mental health field, but there are different distinctions, different categories as well. One of these is dysthymia. Now, with dysthymia, it's a lighter grade of depression. Officially, how it's defined in the DSM is that it's a disorder that has depressed mood for most of the day, for more days rather than not, and it's something that you can experience for a longer period of time, sometimes even up to years. Basically, it has some of the very similar symptoms: poor appetite, difficulty with appetite, difficulty with sleeping, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration or difficulty making decisions, and feelings of hopelessness. These are all parts of major depressive disorder. But here is the interesting difference. Here's the big, big difference. Dysthymia overall is a situation in which, even though you feel sad and depressed and you have this overcoming this feeling where you just don't have a lot of energy, the person has just enough energy to be able to do their minimal daily responsibilities, which means they just have enough energy to go to work, They just have enough energy to be able to take care of themselves. They just have enough energy to get up and go out and do errands, things of that nature. That's what the difference is between dysthymia and major depressive disorder. Think of dysthymia as a lower grade, longer term depressive, longer term time in which the person has just enough energy to do what they need to do. To put it like this, think of it like Groundhog Day. You have that, think of it like Groundhog Day. You have just enough energy to do what you have to do today, and then you wake up the next day to do it once again. And it just feels like an eternal Groundhog Day in terms of your energy, in terms of your mood. So that's the general difference between dysthymia and major depressive disorder. There's also one other grade. I'm sure there's one other major grade, I guess you could say, with depression, and that is seasonal affective disorder. And we'll get into seasonal affective disorder right after the break. Promote and advertise right here on the Intuitive Insight podcast and have your business, practice, or product be noted and highlighted on future episodes. If you would like to partner with us on the Intuitive Insight podcast and reach a new audience, send an email to media@intuitiveinsightcounseling.com. Okay, so we are back, and now we will go ahead and discuss another form of depression in the depressive disorders, which is called seasonal affective disorder. Now, right now with the seasonal affective disorder, there are the mental health community is split between whether it's an actual diagnosable or a true diagnosable condition, or if it's not. A lot of individuals, especially in not extreme climates, in climates where they would experience less sun. For example, the extreme northern parts of extreme northern countries, or climates, or extreme southern climates, where there is a winter season and there's less sun. There is a higher chance of individuals in these regions to experience seasonal affective disorder. Now, this doesn't mean that those in other parts of the world can experience them, but it tends to have higher numbers in more climates where there's winter weather. Now, oftentimes it starts when there is that change there's that daylight savings time where we fall back an hour. Here in the United States, that tends to be in the month of November, and obviously what happens is there's even less sun, especially for a lot of colder climate areas. And oftentimes with seasonal affective disorder, a lot of the difficulties that we experience or that are experienced during that time sounds a lot like some of the depressive symptoms. For example, there's feelings of sadness, lethargy, drowsiness, and interestingly enough, a craving for carbohydrates. Now, this sounds a lot like some of the other depressive symptoms, but once again, I kind of look at seasonal affective disorder as it's almost like a winter version of dysthymia, where you have just enough, you have the energy you need to be able to do what you have to do, but it just seems like a stronger, a longer, it seems that more tangible that you have experiences or difficulties with lower moods and sadness during those times. Now, it's interesting, because when you look at the symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, a lot of it seems to kind of play on how much light and sun you get. And it's interesting because one of the ways to treat seasonal affective disorder which differs a little bit from the other depressive moods and things, is phototherapy. Basically, having an opportunity to get and establish as much light, to get as much sun as you can, natural light as you can, and if possible, and if it's not possible, because we cannot control the weather. That's the one thing we can't control that. We can, if we have an opportunity to get a phototherapy light that is with a certain brightness, then that can be something helpful as well. And that's an interesting part that differs from the other parts of depression, the major depressive or the dysthymia. But the interesting part here with seasonal affective disorder is that when the seasons start to change from winter and into spring and into summer, where there's even more light, what tends to happen is those who experience seasonal affective disorder are more likely to have an elevated mood because there is more sunlight out. Now, the big question that everybody always has is, if I'm experiencing depression, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get this treated? Well, it's not always an easy question to answer. But the most important part of getting treatment and getting the right kind of care that you need is understanding and being able to realize that, hey, something's wrong, something's off with me, and I need to have I need to get a second look, somebody else to give me a second look to see if there is something wrong with me, or if there's something that's going on for me, and if there's something that can be done. Because there are times when we experience depression, whether it be major depressive disorder, dysthymia, or anything else, when we try to take it on on our own. And there are times there are individuals who can do that, and then there are times when all of our efforts don't bear as much fruit as we want. And during those times are the times when we want to be able to get that second opinion, that second look, to seek medical and professional care. Now, seeking the right type of care is important. I do believe very, very strongly that when you are experiencing anything like this, if you feel that you're experiencing depression or any kind of depressive symptoms that last for a while and it starts to take over different aspects of your life, rather than just your mood, but also being able to take care of your responsibilities, being able to go to work or go to school, being able to enjoy time with friends. If it's starting to take over your life in that way, the important thing is to be able to say, okay, I think I need to get some a professional opinion. I always suggest, first things first, is to start by going to your medical health practitioner, whether it is a doctor, whether your primary care physician, whether it's your family doctor, whether it's being able to start that connection. So at the very least, you can see if there's a physiological basis to what's going on. Many times have I worked with individuals who have mental health issues, and the one thing they haven't done is go and see their medical professional. And there have been times when they would speak to their medical professional and they would find, there's something going on with you physiologically, which might be altering your neurochemistry and creating mental health difficulties for you. That can happen. So I always recommend, whenever you try to start treatment, is to get an opinion, to get a medical advice. And once you start from there tends to be treatment options through medications and also through therapies, talk therapy, psychotherapies, and multiple different things that can help manage the depressive symptoms. Ultimately, is depression something is going to be part of your whole life? Will you have major depressive disorder for your whole life? From my perspective, it's not something that you can think about as a whole life thing. It's something that you try to manage. Just like any other medical condition, having experiences or having a difficulty with depression often signifies less about getting a magic cure and more about learning how to manage the symptoms. So I like to think of it as major depressive disorder and other depressive disorders as, think of it like the weather. We know we can't control the weather, but just because we can't control the weather, does that mean that we can't prepare for the weather? In the Northeast with Winter Storm Stella, we knew that it was coming. But does that mean that we couldn't have prepared for it? A lot of people did, and some people did not. But ultimately, most individuals were prepared. And by preparing for it, they were able to get through the storm as best as they could with minimal damage, hopefully, and clean up after the storm passed through. In the same way, mental health issues, depression, anything like that can be looked at within the same type of analogy and metaphor. It's more about understanding that a storm is coming, those depression clouds are coming, and to prepare ourselves to manage the depression, to manage the dysthymia, to manage the seasonal affective disorder in the best way we can. And apart from psychopharmacological perspectives, medicines, that's one part of the puzzle in management. Another part is also being able to have the appropriate talk therapy, the appropriate therapist that you can work with. At Intuitive Insight Counseling, we do offer that. But apart from that as well, there's a couple of things that are really, really important to keep in mind too. It's really to understand the different levels of supports that you have, the different tiers of supports that you have. Every single person, when it comes to dealing with depression or anything that negative that comes into their life, we all have defense mechanisms. We all have ways to help us break out of that funk, whether it's doing an activity that we enjoy, whether it's hanging out with people that we care about, whether it's people who we care about understanding and caring enough to come to us and say, hey man, let's do something together. Let's hang out. Let's do something that you like to enjoy. Being able to understand the different tiers and supportive networks that you can put around you and surround yourself with is an important part of management. Often I discuss with my clients about creating a toolbox. And part of being able to create this toolbox is to list all the things that we enjoy doing, all the things that help us get back to the present moment, all the things that make us feel better, all the people who make us feel better, so on and so forth. And ultimately, by knowing all of these different tools, we can create and arrange a different levels or different tiers of tools that we use based on the situation. For example, I separate mine into 3 tiers. Tier 1 are usually things that you can do for yourself. Tier 2s are usually things that would require a little bit of extra effort. For example, being able to set up a plan with someone to do an activity with. And tier 3s are more about last resort types of tools to use. We can certainly discuss more about the toolbox system in a future episode of the Intuitive Insight podcast. But being able to have the appropriate tools to stabilize ourselves when we are experiencing these negative emotions is important. And once we start stabilizing, then deeper work can be done to try and explore and uncover what are the deeper rooted causes and influencers for what is causing the depression in the first place. Of course, apart from the standard of medication and psychotherapy, there are also other things that we can do personally to minimize the effect of depressive symptoms and disorders and maximize our output, such as lifestyle changes, diet changes, and exercise. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or stories regarding your mental health, balance, or counseling journey, which you'd like to share on a future Intuitive Insight mailbag, please send them to media@intuitiveinsightcounseling.com. At the end of each episode, we try to sum everything that we've talked about into small bits of insight that tries to inspire others and ourselves to build upon our own awareness and insight, as well as to help us in our journey of living a balanced life. It's time for the Insight of the Night. Today's episode focused on depression, specifically the three types of depression that are usually associated with depressive disorders. Major depressive disorder, which is known as clinical depression, where it's a debilitating lack of energy, debilitating low mood, debilitating sadness that lingers for 2 or more weeks, and where there is absolutely no energy to be able to even function, to be able to even take care of our personal responsibilities. Of course, then there's dysthymia, which is a lower dose, I guess you could say, of depression, where we feel the effects of a low mood and sadness and lack of energy, but not to the point where it prevents us from taking care of our responsibilities. In fact, dysthymia is it's almost kind of like if you're a Game of Thrones fan, it's a long winter. It's like a long stretch of lower mood and lower energy, but still being able to get up in the morning, go to work, go to school, do what you have to do, kind of perspective. And then, of course, there's the third, which is seasonal affective disorder, which often affects individuals who in climates where there is a winter. That, once again, not saying that it doesn't affect people in other climates, but there's a higher chance of developing more severe depressive symptoms during the winter months in comparison to the summer months. And of course, ultimately the treatment for depression is being able to, number one, recognize the symptoms, whether it's yourself or whether it's a friend of yours, or whether it's you notice some of these symptoms in a loved one or someone you care about. Being able to try and advocate for them or advocate for yourself by seeking medical and appropriate professional care through a doctor, through a mental health professional, and also being willing to make some lifestyle changes and sacrifices in order to get things going into the direction that we want. I often say with depression or anything that is with the mood disorders that it's like a giant storm is coming your way. And the more that we are able to see that we are in the thick of a storm, the better we are next time to be able to handle if we see storm clouds brewing. It's like watching the weather forecast, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast. If you know bad storm is coming, it's up to you to decide how you prepare for it. Are you going to choose to not prepare for it? Then there's a strong chance that this storm is going to knock you backwards. It's going to knock you down. It's going to hit you harder than you want. But if you make the choice actively to prepare for it, it helps minimize the impact that the storm, the depression, can have in your life, in our life. And this is all done by making those lifestyle changes, evolving those habits, by being able to understand that, hey, I want to advocate for myself, or I want to advocate for somebody who I think needs the help. And being able to make that distinction, make that choice to say, hey, I want to help myself. I want to help manage this. I want to minimize the effects of depression, the effects of the storm in my life, so I can continue living a life that I have earned and a life that I want in a positive, meaningful, and well-balanced way.
That's all for this episode of the Intuitive Insight Podcast. I hope that there was something that helped bring a little bit of insight into your life. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to take the journey with us to build your insight, subscribe to the Intuitive Insight Podcast. Check out intuitiveinsightmedia.com for updates for our next episode. As always, this is Timmy E. of the Intuitive Insight Podcast, and don't forget, strong on our own, more powerful together. Have a great night.